You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Happy hump day, everyone. It's Wednesday. What does that mean? 9 p.m. the UK on a Wednesday night. It's Haunted Histories. Yay! I've been looking forward to this all week. I love doing my Haunted History show. I love hearing from you guys, what you've got to tell me, the chat in the chat room, although no one's in there just yet, but I'm sure someone will appear in a minute, say hello. But tonight we've got a television star as our guest. You know what we're like here at Parasearch. You know, we don't scrimp on the guests. We get some corkers on here for you on all the different Parasearch shows. I can't even speak. I have actually got a glass of wine in my hand. That sounds really unprofessional, doesn't it? But, you know, the bottle had to be finished. It is only my first glass, so I'm not drunk yet. But, yes, so we've got a corker of a guest on here for you tonight, and it was a real treat for me to interview him because he's one of the people I said right at the beginning when Mr. Clements first asked me if I'd do a show on Parasearch. I was asked who I'd like to get on as a guest, and my guest tonight is one of the first people I said I wanted to get on as a guest. Didn't know it was going to happen, but there you go. You need to set your sights high, people. Things you don't expect can actually come true. There you go. Anyway, what's everyone been up to? I hope you've all gone over to our YouTube page and liked it and shared it and all that wonderful stuff. Lots of stuff on there for you to listen to, and I keep saying there will be extra content. There is extra content in the pipeline going on there. Have you read all our latest blogs? No? Go on the website, go and have a look at those. There's some really interesting blogs, and plus on the YouTube channel you can listen to all the past shows, whether it's the Girls at the Supernatural show that you want to listen to, or Kerry over at Spirit Dimension, or Kaz in the Spectral Zone, or Paul and Kerry at Paranormal Concept, whatever it is. Whatever, it was good old me, little old me at Haunted Histories. Go and have a listen and let us know what you think. Do give us some feedback. Still got the competition running to win those 2 books. Well, I should say they're my books, really, because I want to win them, but I'm not allowed to, because I'm an employee of Parasearch. So whoever wins them, I'll probably be sending you a message asking to borrow them at some time. I hope that's okay. But that closes on Monday the 24th of September, so make sure you go along, give it a like, put down why you want to win the books, or if you want to win the books, and so we can get some competition going on there. So, what's everyone been up to? Well, as you probably heard Kerry mention last week, it was Heritage Week in the UK the last couple of weeks, or Heritage Weeks I suppose it should be called, and I decided to go over to the Stomaries airfield in Essex, just outside. It's about 20 minutes outside of Chelmsford this weekend, just gone. It's a World War One. It's the largest surviving World War One aerodrome remaining. And I can honestly say it was well worth the visit. It's a very interesting place. It's somewhere that even children would probably enjoy because there's stuff for the children to do. You can see them working on actual aircraft there, and if you're lucky... Hi, Jeanette! If you're lucky, you'll actually see some aircraft landing, which we did. We saw a biplane coming in. It was quite exciting, especially as my eldest was adamant it was a radio-controlled aeroplane, until I pointed out there was people sitting in it. But yes, watching that come in and land on the grass runway was exciting, and they're still working on renovating more of the buildings there to make the museum even bigger. So if you're ever in Essex or in the area, go and have a look, Stomary's Airfield. So what else have I been up to? Well, actually this weekend, well, it was my birthday back in July, but any of you who remember, my husband bought us tickets to do the Jack the Ripper tour in London, and we're doing it this Saturday, and I'm very excited. Very, very. What are you laughing at, Jeanette? What are you laughing at there, girl? I didn't think I'd said anything that funny. Oh well, thanks anyway. What was I saying? Yes, Jack the Ripper tour, this Saturday. So I'm sure I'll tell you all about that when I do my Haunted History show next week. I know it's something that probably a lot of you have been on, but it's something I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. And hi, Mark. And interestingly enough, I was watching a programme the other night on the UK's obsession with murder. It was presented by Dr. Lucy Worsley? I can't remember how to pronounce her surname. Anyway, it was looking at the Victorians' obsession with murder, and the last part of it obviously featured Jack the Ripper. And interesting enough, it was just a big smile, was it, Jeanette? Okay, I'll let you off then, honey. I was talking aeroplanes. I was talking aircraft, World War I aircraft. There you go. Anyway, yes, it transpires that the first Jack the Ripper tour was done back in 1905, would you believe? So the tours have been going on for over 100 years. It's nothing new, which I thought was really, really interesting. The other interesting fact, which I thought was I'm going to share with you, because I've got to talk for 10 minutes, you see, before the interview starts playing out. But there is a reason. There is method in my madness, to quote King Lear. But yes, anyone know where the phrase sweet FA comes from, and not F, the word you think it is? It actually stands for Sweet Fanny Adams. And does anyone know where that comes from? I'm going to tell you. It was a little girl by the name of Fanny Adams who was murdered back in the 1800s, and because she was so small and so insignificant, that's where the term Fanny Adams comes from, Sweet Fanny Adams, because of a little murdered girl. Doesn't sound quite so nice now, does it, when you say Sweet FA? I mean, I knew the polite version was Fanny Adams. I very rarely used the polite version, if I'm completely honest. But yeah, did you know that? That's where it comes from. There you go. You learn loads on my show. So informative. You know, people pay for this kind of thing. Well, not me, they don't. But maybe they do. I don't know whether people are paid for that information. But courtesy of the television, I found it. But I thought it was interesting. But yeah, Jack the Ripper tour since 1905. Amazing, really, isn't it? Especially as some of the buildings would have still been there back then. But anyway, enough of that. Tonight's show, which I'm sure is what you've tuned in to listen to, is on what was known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America, although ironically the site was only 37 acres once within the walls, but, you know, semantics. Missouri State Penitentiary. Okay, and on tonight's show, I'm trying to be sensible here, doing this interview, because, you know, I'm a professional, but I've actually got a guest who is probably one of the reasons I started investigating in the first place, and I have told him this story, so he knows I'm not just some weirdo who's just saying it for the sake of it, but it's only the one and only Mr. Chris Smith of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're more than... Thank you so much for giving up some of your valuable time, because I know you're very busy at the moment with sort of function-type, Paracon-type things, because you've just come back from Scarefest, haven't you?
Yeah, Scarefest was great. We try to go every year we can, but, it's a nice break. We do filming on Fridays, and then we usually are traveling right after that to go to some event somewhere across the country, so it's a nice break.
Yeah. How far is... I mean, my American geography isn't great. How far... It was Kentucky, wasn't it, Scarefest? How far is that from Nashville?
Right, it's about 3.5 hours.
Oh, not too bad then. Not too bad.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Not bad. And I hear that you were having a little play fighting with our Ghost Brother friends whilst you were there.
Oh yeah, man, those guys are great. We have a lot of fun with those guys. They're like us. They don't take themselves very seriously at all. So we just kind of put on a little publicity thing that we were rivals or whatever. But once we had the ghost hunt, we all worked together and just had a big time with it.
Oh, brilliant! I do love those boys. When we had I had Dalen on my show earlier this year talking about the Winchester house, and yeah, he had me in stitches laughing. It was I was trying to be sensible and do the interview, and it was just not happening. It was not happening. They're great guys. I love them. So I told you the story of why you guys were quite influential in me starting actually properly investigating. And I know the story of how you got into it yourself was to do with your granddad's barn, and you were looking for a tyre or something.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I actually. That barn is just a big pile of wood now, and Mike and I were doing some filming around it. I believe it was sometime early this year,
all right.
And we actually found those tires in the rubble. So yeah, that's absolutely right. I was up there looking for some tires, saw what I believed to be a shadow man. It scared me half to death, but it raised a lot of questions in my mind about paranormal, which is something I never even thought about up until that point. So yeah, that's what got me started.
And so, how old were you then?
This was probably mid-20s. I'm 37 now, so a little over 10 years ago, which TWC was founded. I founded that in 2009. Yeah. So we're coming up on 10 years ourselves. So yeah, probably I'd say between 10, 15 years ago.
Wow, okay. And so you do all your investigating with your little brother, Brannon. Was he in it from the start then? Sort of from 10 years ago?
Yeah, he was. It wasn't very long after we started that he decided he wanted to be a part of it. It was just one of those things where I was very secretive about it. I was on a show called Ghost Hunters Academy with Steve Tango, and he had no idea until it came out, and he was like, "Wow, I didn't know you were into this type of stuff." And he's on the physics end, the scientific, and he really wanted to try to test the boundaries of the metaphysical and all the science stuff about it. He's very theoretical, and so he has kind of that approach to it.
So how does his science side tend to help? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's the one who's responsible for a lot of the devices and the transportation devices, traps, experiments that we use on the show. I mean, in theory, ghosts give off energy or an electromagnetic field, and they fluctuate within that field. And I think he's really influential in trying to figure out different ways of measuring it, a lot of different ways of trying to figure out how to contain it. It's also good to have somebody as skeptical as Brandon is. He's always trying to debunk, which is a very important part of paranormal investigation. So it's good to have someone like Doogie who's on the other spectrum, complete believer, very kind of in tune with his, sensitive side, if that's what you want to call it. And then you got Brandon on the other end of the spectrum, who isn't at all. He's all science. So, I think it's good to have a different level of personality on the team.
I agree. So, out of all Brannon's devices that you've had on, I think it was 3 series of Ghost Asylum went out, wasn't it? Which would you say was your favourite?
Well, there were a lot of different kinds. We had, I would probably say the one that I think was the most successful was actually our first episode of Ghost Asylum ever was Old War Memorial Hospital. That was in Scottsville, Kentucky. And it looked basically like a little piece of fence, and it had a capacitor attached to it with a little solar panel. And the theory was trying to see if we could capture the energy in that solar panel and then transfer it to that little capacitor and do it in pitch black darkness. And if, you can get that to happen, then how do you explain that? And we actually got the capacitor to charge for a short period of time. So that was one of the ones that I thought was pretty smart and seemed to actually work for a short period of time.
Okay. So have you and your brother ever had a row when you've been investigating? Have you ever, siblings tend to fight. or fallout, as I've now taught you what falling out with someone means. I'll get you all these English phrases, Chris. You'll be an Anglophile by the end of this conversation. You'll know what they all mean. I'll be translating them for you as I go along. But have you and your brother ever had a row when investigating, or got annoyed with each other, or?
Oh, I'm sure that we always, they're five guys. We travel together. We're all in the same plane or the same Sprinter van for hours. We all get tired of each other's, talking or smells or all different types of things that you have to share with other guys. But, no more than any of the other guys.
Yeah.
Brandon is probably the most easygoing kid you'll ever meet. Nothing really. The only thing that gets him kind of riled up is if you don't give him enough time to investigate outside of the show, because when we're investigating on the show, we have producers, we have cameramen, sound guys. Brandon likes his own personal time to go to every case or every location and investigate by himself. And if you rush him, he gets a little bit frustrated. But other than that, no, he's easy as pie to get along with.
Yeah, he does seem very laid back. And the only one, I think it was the only one he wasn't, was when he was affected at
it was.
He got really bad. He got really angry, didn't he? And he was kicking doors, and it was quite sort of shocking.
Yeah, that was very startling for me. It was the first time I'd ever seen him react in such a way. And Cannon, that particular location is notorious for making people do things that they normally wouldn't do. I just never thought it would have happened to Brandon. So obviously it was very frightening for me, him being my brother, knowing him his whole life, never even heard him curse. So it was, when that happened, it had an emotional effect on me. But as soon as we got him out of the building, it seemed everything kind of got back to normal.
Yeah, it did quite. I remember the episode because it was it was an emotional one, seeing how upset you were when you were trying to calm him down outside and everything else. But what has been one of your favourite places to investigate for the television shows?
Oh, I mean, probably, I would say it's a tie as far as where we filmed between Old South Pittsburgh Hospital and Salem, Massachusetts. We got to do Salem on Haunted Towns. That place is so rich in tragic history, where they had the witch trials. And, that kind of stuff really interests me, the way that whole, period went down. I mean, obviously, I feel like, for the most part, these were not witches at all. These were just a couple of higher-ups that wanted to get rid of some people that they didn't get along with, and they used that. But I think that area now is extremely haunted because of that. But anyway, we had a lot of really great things happen. We investigated there. And then Old South Pittsburgh Hospital, that's probably one of the most haunted places that I've ever investigated. We've been there, I would say, probably over 50 times. And every time we go there, it never disappoints.
Has that reopened yet to investigations? Because it shut down for a while, didn't it?
They're working on it. They do have new management. We're excited to meet him. I've talked to him briefly on social, but we're looking really forward to them getting that place up and running again. Because I mean, that place is just amazing. Anybody that goes there will tell you.
Well, that's another one that's on my wish list one day if I get over to the States again. So hopefully it'll be reopened by the time I get over there. But you mentioned the witches. I was telling you where I'm from in the UK. A lot of the witch hunts started in the UK from the county I live in.
Really?
Yeah, in fact, a guy called Matthew Hopkins, who was the witch finder general in the 1600s, he lived about 20 miles up the road from where I live now.
Oh.
So, when you come over, I'll show you all of that stuff as well.
Very cool. You learn something new every day.
There you go. No, it was mainly sort of Essex, which is the county I live in, Kent, which is the sort of next county sort of down, if that makes sense, and then Cambridgeshire, which is the next. Those three counties were pretty much where he plied his trade, shall we say. And everyone was so scared of witches back then that they were quite happy to they'd pay him to basically come into their towns to get rid of the witches.
Oh goodness!
Yeah, he was basically a con man.
It was such a crazy time in our history, in the history of the world, I guess.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of bad things going on.
Yeah. Yep, you could point the finger at someone you didn't like and people would tend to believe you that they were witches. The other big one in the UK was something called the Pendle Witches up in the northwest, which is quite in its sad story. It was somebody's little girl who sort of gave evidence thinking that she'd be protected, and then her whole family were executed and she got left to sort of as destitute. So it's Salem was interesting. We did the show Reporter on Salem, so because that's one that a lot of people, very interesting place. So have any of these places you've been to ever scared you to the point where you've struggled to stay in there?
There's only, and we talked about this briefly, but there is one place, and I can't tell you where it is because it's very secret. It took us years to even get into this location to investigate.
Mr. Smith, you're such a tease.
It dates back to the Civil War, and it's just a very, very haunted building. It's not very far from where I grew up, and we heard stories growing up about this place my whole life. Mm-hmm. And we finally, after about 5 or 6 years of trying, got into the building, and it was the only place I've ever been where I couldn't last doing a solo session. We always do our solo sessions whenever we do these private investigations, just to see what kind of activity, because a lot of times you'll put yourself in a vulnerable situation and the activity will kick up. I lasted maybe 5 minutes and I came back out just because the feeling in this place was so heavy, and it terrified me. And it's something that, I've been all over the country investigating some of the most haunted, prisons, hospitals, forts. I mean, you name it, I've probably investigated it, and that's the only time it's ever happened to me.
Wow. Okay.
But one good thing is I think we are going there this season for Haunted Live. So it'll be the first time it's ever been on television, and everybody will get to hopefully see me get just as scared again on live television.
So, does anyone actually live in this place?
No.
Occupied? It's not occupied?
No, it's not anymore.
Oh.
Well, not by the living.
Wow. God, and just for the record, he hasn't told me where this place is off air either. So people can't even torture me to get the information out because I don't know. We'll just have to wait to get Haunted Live in the UK at some point. So if you had a magic wand and you could choose 3 places anywhere in the world to go and investigate, what would they be?
Oh wow! The Ancient Rams Inn, that's one of the places I've always wanted to investigate over in your neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. And basically I saw it on an episode of Ghost Adventures a long time ago, and it just seems like one of those classic, British horror movie don't go in here type of places, and those are the absolute kind of places I like to go into.
We've got a lot of them.
So hopefully one day I'll get to go across the pond and check that place out.
Well, you've got to come across because we're going to take you out for a beer, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah. I would love to have a pint somewhere and see what's happening on the other side.
There you go. So Ancient Ram Inn, yeah, we can sort that.
I would love to do that. I've always wanted to go and check out Dracula's castle over there.
Yes. Yeah.
That one's a big one, just because it's so old and so much death and violence happened there. Plus the whole, Dracula story, the Vlad thing, that interests me. Just to be in such a different place, a different country with such different culture, and where so much happened in that one area, that would be just, I'm sure it's very heavy there. I would have to say my bucket list number 1 place would be the Bell Witch cave, or even the Bell Witch School over there, the Bell Witch Cemetery. Are you familiar with the Bell Witch story?
I've heard of it.
Well, it's in Adams, Tennessee, which is only about an hour away from me, and I've never even had a tour there. But my mom and dad, they used to read me stories about the Bell Witch, and it's basically a family, John Bell and his family, that were tortured by what they called a witch for for years, and it's actually in the history books that this witch supposedly poisoned John Bell and killed him. The guy basically went crazy. The whole story is very intriguing. Andrew Jackson actually went to visit the witch and got the hell scared out of him. It's just one of those places that I've always wanted to go and try to, I guess, test how brave I am, because I've always been very terrified of the story, and it's so close to me, and we haven't been able to gain access. But
Ghost
hopefully,
Adventures did one there, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
and,
I knew the story, because doesn't the cave flood quite a lot?
Yeah, actually, we had permission to go there at one time, I think, during Ghost Asylum. But the reason we couldn't for that particular time was because of the flooding. So.
So that's number one. Well, you know, if it's that close, it's got to happen really when it's that close to.
One day,
hasn't it?
One day, I'm just gonna break in.
Shh! I'm recording.
Oh man,
there's evidence.
I know, right? I'm just gonna wait till I'm an old man. I'm old and senile, and then I can't get in trouble for it. They'll be like, "Oh, he's old. He didn't know what he was doing."
I like your style. We'll be there with our walking sticks, telling sort of the youngsters. No, we didn't know what we thought. We thought this was the old people's club. You know?
Exactly. The old people get away with everything.
Old people and little cute children. It's right. Either ends of the spectrum. Yeah. Well, the whole purpose of getting you on the show tonight was to talk about Missouri State Penitentiary. Now, anyone who follows Ghost Asylum will know you did a cracking episode there. Was that series 2 or series 3? I can't remember now.
I believe it was 3, yeah. Season 3, episode 4.
Yeah. It was a cracking episode, and for anyone, the UK ones, they do rerun Ghost Asylum all the time on our sort of television channels, which is great. But one of the things that fascinated me about MoPen is most of us, when we think of prisons, we think of Alcatraz, an American prison. But Missouri is actually the prison part of Alcatraz, and obviously the bit that's kind of below ground. But the main prison part, Missouri is 100 years older than Alcatraz, and also 3 times the size. It had probably at its peak about 3 times the amount of inmates. And the other thing about Missouri is the fact that it was known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There were, obviously they executed 40 inmates there in the gas chamber, one of which was a woman. They had a huge riot there in 1954. There was just a lot of, it just seemed to be shrouded in violence. Those places.
Yeah, I mean, it's also the reason it was built was because the governor, the then governor of Missouri, wanted to make sure Jefferson City stayed as the main seat of government for Missouri, and John Miller felt that the main way to do this was to have a big prison there back in 1831. So the prison opened in 1836, and what's quite shocking when you look at the state of it is it didn't shut until 2004.
Right.
Sorry?
I said, that's crazy, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? And I mean, I was reading an account when I was doing the research of someone who was there up until the 2004 and was then moved to the new Jefferson City Correctional Facility. And he said people would find shivs in the walls that had been pushed into the walls from previous residents, I suppose.
Right.
The water, the guards wouldn't actually drink the water, the tap water, because it was brown. They wouldn't bother cleaning the pipes or anything, and a lot of people got ill just from the water because it wasn't pure drinking water. And he said he'd never seen violence at that level, even in sort of like 2001, 2002, which I found quite shocking. But it's obviously a massive site when you go there. It looks to me like the photos I've seen, it's quite close to the road, isn't it? The main road that sort of goes past. Yeah,
it is. It's right there on the road. In fact, there's just like a little gate you run through, and then you kind of go up the hill a little ways, and it's right there. So, it was very close to just people and surrounding neighborhood.
So what feeling do you get as you go into it? Does it feel foreboding, or...?
Yeah, I mean, it's different any prison you go to. We've investigated several now, but obviously, like I was saying before, Mopen is just such a huge place, and it has so many different buildings. But, you know, after you hear the stories, sometimes I wish we would go into investigations not knowing anything about the history, because sometimes you can kind of prelude yourself to feel things just knowing what happened there. But I would say probably the heaviest place is probably B block. I believe it's no, don't quote me, but I believe it is building B. It has a what they call the dungeon down there. It's where they would have like solitary confinement. That's one of the heaviest places, and it really does feel like a dungeon down there. I know that there was a lot of murders in that particular block, and a lot of people died. You know, they were stabbed to death. I know one guy was stabbed in the face. I can't remember how many times. But yeah, it is a heavy feeling. And then also you have the gas chamber, which is down the hill. And you think about the walk, it would be a pretty long walk to take from the prison down to the gas chamber. So that's kind of a foreboding walk to take, knowing back then, you know, I'm walking to my death and this is taking a long time to get here, and just looking at the gas chamber, and it's heavy all the way around.
Okay. Well, you mentioned about the dungeons. It doesn't surprise me that because they used to actually throw people down there who had mental breakdowns, who couldn't be controlled, not necessarily because they were violent, but because they shouldn't have been in a prison. To be quite honest, they should have been in a mental health facility. But one of the accounts I read is that those. I mean, did you go into the dungeons? Were you able to go into the cells?
Yeah, when we didn't. Now I didn't. Whenever we filmed there, but we did an event there back in May with Ghost
Hunt
Week.
Gina, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Gina was there, and we got to go into the dungeons. But actually, the first time I went there was with Nick Groff. He and I did an event there a couple years ago on his tour, and I was actually stationed down in the dungeon area for the whole event. And we got a lot of really crazy EVPs down there.
Right. Because they could put up to, say, 15, 20 people in one of those cells in the dungeons.
It's really not that big either.
No.
So you were pretty crowded, and from what I understand, you didn't have any light. They wouldn't, you know, there was no light. You would just have to feel around, and you were in complete darkness for months at a time, sometimes years.
I think I found the longest someone spent down there was 17 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, probably if they came outside, they would probably be in shock just from, you know, being in the light again.
Yeah. Well, if they weren't mad when they went down there, they would have been when they came up.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I just wondered how big the cells were, because say there was reports of like 15 to 20 men being in each cell. They'd cram them in there because as a punishment, and they apparently had 2 buckets. One had clean water in, and one was for them to go to the toilet, and it was dark, so you never were quite sure which bucket they were using.
It would be, I mean, probably, in my opinion, it would be worse than death in a lot of accounts.
Yeah. So you're saying you got EVPs and things down in these dungeons?
Right, we did.
What sort of things did you pick up?
Well, during the event I had with Nick, we were using one of those DR60s. It's a very sought-after recorder because it has voice recognition, which means basically you can do a whole EVP session and it will only record your voice and then whatever else it hears, so there's no lag time in between.
Right.
But what we were getting was direct responses to our questions. I can't remember the exact questions, but it seemed to be a male, very raspy voice. Seemed to be very angry that we were down there and very protective of the space. Like I said, I can't remember the exact responses we got, but it seemed like every time we did a burst session, we were getting intelligent, direct responses every single time.
Right. So there's definitely someone down there
protecting
their zone.
I have no doubt.
So did you have women on this event? Like female guests? Did any of them get attacked or... Because one of the things I seem to see is when a lot of women go into these kind of prisons, they get either like slapped, you know, their bum slapped or their hair pulled or something.
Actually, if I recall correctly, I believe that there was one young lady that claimed that she had her bra strap popped. Something grabbed her bra strap and popped.
Okay.
I'm not making this up.
Okay.
There were, I believe there were several women that reported a little bit of hair pulling. And I'm not sure if this happened here or not. I know that a lot of times we'll do investigations at these prisons, and women will say, like you were saying, they'll get their butt grabbed or something, or somebody will brush against it, and there's nobody behind them. It wouldn't surprise me if that happened there, but sometimes these prisons run together.
Yeah.
With events, but yeah, it's not uncommon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if we go up to where some of the main cells are, you mentioned about someone who had, well, I think it was Doogie and Porter talked about him in the episode, but I think cell 76, and he had his eyes gouged out, and then he was crawling along like the walkway area, and that was one of the ones they tried to communicate with. But there's also stuff that happened in some of the other cells that are meant to make them quite notorious. And what you were saying about you don't always like to, you sometimes find knowing the history of a place makes you almost come up with things. I'm the opposite. I never look up what the hauntings are of a place, but I like to know the history, because then I use the history to sort of prompt questions and that kind of thing. But I never ever look up reported hauntings. But I do know that during you mentioned the riot of 1954, Walter Lee Donnell was basically bludgeoned to death in his cell by some of the prisoners. Did any of the particular cells give off anything when you visited them?
They were all. I don't think when we investigated there was any particular cell that gave off any different feeling, for me anyway, than any of the other cells. It was just the whole block that felt heavy to me. Yeah. There were a couple of specific historical ones, like the one you were talking about, where the guy, he did get his eyes gouged out, and he was later, stabbed to death. But that area, it's like I was saying before. Sometimes when you have it in your head, it kind of messes with you, and it makes you kind of predispositioned to feel certain things.
Yeah.
But like I was saying earlier, the whole block in general. If you go to Missouri State Pen, you're going to feel things, even if you don't know all the history, just because it was such a violent place.
Mm. It does seem to have more violence attached to it in some of the other prisons I've read about.
Yeah. It's got a lot of blood, and it may have just been. You never know. I mean, sometimes it's connected to the land. It could have just been where they built the prison. I'm sure that there's probably some more historical evidence of that. A lot of times we investigate places, even before television. We would do history reviews on the land to try to see what went down back in the day, and sometimes there would have been a battle there, or maybe some burial grounds, or something got disturbed. Yeah. I mean, you just never know.
Yeah, no, I do wonder, because so you expect a prison, especially when you've got some of the people who would have been held at Mopen in there, they are going to kick off and start fights and attack each other, and it's kind of just the nature of the beast, so to speak. But when you get one that's known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America, and prisoners who've done time there it was also known as the Walls, wasn't it? That they've done time there, that said it's the worst prison they've ever been in.
Right.
It does sort of make you wonder what else is influencing it over and above just maybe the bad juju from the actual prisoners.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, even the Bible, it talks about, a dry place for spirits or demons to harbor. That's another thing. There's so much violence that went on there, and now the place is empty. I think, like you had mentioned, it was in the early 2000s when the thing shut down, but now it's just sitting there empty. It's a good place for something evil to hang around.
True. To feel at home. There's been quite a few famous residents of Mopen. James L. Ray, who actually was the person who assassinated Martin Luther King, was in prison there. He actually escaped from there, I believe, in a bread truck or something. A chap by the name of Sonny Liston, who discovered boxing while he was and became a champion boxer when he got early release, and turned his life around and became a champion boxer. Pretty Boy Floyd, Charles
Yep.
Arthur, Pretty Boy Floyd, was there in 1925. He was one of the ones who was meant to, for anyone listening who's interested, he was one of the ones who was meant to have been part of the Kansas City massacre of 1933 with Adam Richetti, and Adam Richetti was actually executed at Mopen. And what I did was, rather than look sort of names of all the different prisoners who've been held there, I actually went to the 1925 records to see the kind of thing people were held there for. Bear in mind, this was a maximum security prison, so you'd expect it to be sort of burglars, rapists, murderers, everything else. There was the murderers. There was someone who got a 5-year sentence for driving whilst intoxicated. There was someone there who was sentenced because of bigamy in 1925. There was someone sentenced for forgery. And the ones that made me realise, it just made me think of the Dukes of Hazzard. People in prison for booze running and manufacturing moonshine.
It's funny. My uncle, whenever we went to investigate Missouri State Pen, he was telling me how he was actually arrested there. He used to be a truck driver. This was, I think, in his early 20s, and they didn't have the proper license. They got pulled over, and he had to spend a couple days in there in the bullpen. So he's always bragging about that.
I'm not sure I'd brag about it, but hey ho. Well,
because we were talking about it and talking about Sonny Liston and some of the more famous people that have been in prison there, and he's like, I've been there. Your uncle's been there. Talking to me like that, like it was some big, to do. But that's rednecks for you. You know what I'm saying?
See, I got told off calling. We've got someone who used to do one of our shows, and he's proud to say he's a redneck, and I called him the para redneck because he's a paranormal investigator and he's a redneck. And somebody said, "You can't say that to someone; it's not politically correct." And he went and got a T-shirt with "I'm a para redneck" on it because he thought it was quite good. So,
rednecks don't care about being called rednecks. There is no political correctness around here.
No? Oh, okay. I got told off, and he had to come in and say, "No, it's fine. She can call me that. It's fine. I don't mind." We have a similar thing here. If you call Essex girls who are from Essex are meant to be a certain way, and it's meant to be a bit of an insult if you're called an Essex girl. You're meant to be sort of a bit thick and a bit free and easy with your favours and
okay.
Yeah, blonde hair, white shoes. I
think we got a few Essex chicks over here in the States.
I am an Essex girl. I'm proud of it, and I'm blonde. But there you go. Getting back to Missouri. So we've talked about some of the famous prisoners. I mean, Pretty Boy Floyd, Sonny Liston. But one of the ones that you focused on in the show was the horrific case of Bobby Greenlease.
Right.
And the only woman that has ever been executed at Mopen was Bonnie Heady.
Her and her buddy Carl decided they were going to kidnap the poor kid, and I believe, in my opinion, they never had any intentions of giving him back. As a matter of fact, I think and like I said, sometimes we've been to so many places, my history runs together, but I believe they murdered him before they even made their threats and asked for the ransom.
Yep.
So, two very evil people, but I believe she was she was the one running the show, if you ask me.
Well, she was 7 years older than him.
Right.
So that could have been the case. But, they actually went to the gas chamber together. It was one of the few I think it was the only joint execution from the records that I've read. But just actually interesting, the last ever execution was actually by lethal injection in 1989 using the gas chamber facility. Right. And that was George Tiny Mercer. He was the last execution in 1989, something like 24 years after the last one previously. But Carl Austin Hall and Bonnie Heady were executed together, side by side. And when you guys did the show there, you put, I think it was Doogie and Porter in the gas chamber, didn't you?
Yep.
Chasey Ray looked quite pleased to be pulling the lever. He did look like he was enjoying his role
Yeah,
a little bit too much.
he did. I think what we enjoyed the most about that was Doogie is a germaphobe, and they gave him this uniform to wear, and he was not excited about putting that thing on just because he was afraid it had. And then we had the thermal camera on him, and we were giving him hell, saying, "Oh man, you should see all the stuff we're picking up on this camera." He was not happy.
Oh, you're cruel. You're cruel. But they had an awful lot of activity in that chamber, didn't they, as they were sitting in there?
Well, we tried to simulate the gas in there. We had some fog in there, and the meters were just going insane, in direct response to some of the questions they were asking. When they were touching on Bonnie and Carl, it seemed to be responding to that. And, I think the judge who sentenced those two said that it was the most cold-blooded, brutal murder that he had ever tried. So,
yeah.
I think there was a lot of energy left behind.
Yeah. I must admit that the one that the bit of it that did make me laugh was when you and I think Chasey were in the accompanying cells, and Chasey was sweet talking you.
Well, hey, we were trying to do a little reenacting there. You got to sometimes get into character.
I mean, yeah, that still now when I watch it, that still makes me crease up with laughter because that was brilliant. That was actually, yeah. He was very convincing as a woman. So, when you've been back there, have you experienced anything else in the gas chamber?
We had a group in there. Actually, the last time that we went there to investigate, my group, where I was leading groups all night, was in the gas chamber. And, it's really hit or miss with any event that we ever host. We always tell everybody to participate because you never know who they're going to talk to.
Yep.
Some groups of people, they're very shy, very timid. They don't want to speak up or try to communicate. And we tell them, this is why we're here. And you never know when they're going to want to talk to you. And there'll be some groups that'll come in and nothing will happen. And then some groups will come in and it'll just take one person speaking up and asking a question and everything will just start going crazy. And there were a couple of those instances, the last event that we did there on a couple of groups where it just took this one lady, just for whatever reason, they wanted to communicate with her. And every time she would ask a question or say something, the meters would just go nuts. Mm-hmm.
So did you get any sort of definitive evidence as to who it could have been who was communicating with her?
No, it was very just kind of at random and,
right.
Just kind of general questions. We were trying to hit on Bonnie a little and Carl, and then we had, obviously, the photograph. If you ever go there, there's a big picture of all the inmates that were executed. We were going down the line, just kind of seeing their names to see if anything pegged. So, no, nothing definitive.
Right. And does that part of the prison, because obviously it's set away from the main prison, isn't it? It's like its own separate, building. It's
just a little tiny building. It's just got just enough room on one side for the gas chamber, and then a little viewing area on the other side.
Yeah. If you didn't know what it was as you were approaching it, would it still be intimidating?
I think so. It's a little stone or concrete building. It's got a huge pipe coming out the top. There are bars on the windows. It definitely. It's kind of foreboding.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, out of all the parts of the prison, it's obviously the whole thing is going to be quite an intimidating place. That's what it is. It's designed to be. Is there any bit of it that doesn't feel quite so? It feels quite almost pleasant.
No.
No? Oh, okay.
I can't say that any part of it feels pleasant. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I believe where the parking lot is now used to be where they would bury a lot of the inmates, and they're all in unmarked graves kind of underneath the pavement there. So,
okay.
Yeah, even the parking lot's creepy.
Okay. I just wonder if, say, the rec area was nicer, or the garden, or if there's like a outdoor area, if that felt But it does look, the photos and sort of videos I've watched of it, obviously your guys' episode and other people who've investigated it, and it does look an amazing place. And I must admit, those gangways outside the cells don't look very wide.
No, they're not. They're very small. It's you can imagine overcrowding during those times. It had to have been pretty brutal.
And how many floors up does it go? Is it 3 or 4?
I believe it is 3. I'm not sure if it's 4, but I know it's at least 3.
So it wouldn't take much to go over one of those barriers.
No, not at all. And then you're pretty much gone.
I did read, though, actually interesting, what made me laugh, is they decided to put snooker tables or pool tables, billiard tables, whatever you'd call them, on the sort of the floor for the prisoners to play, not realising that the prisoners would use the balls as weapons. I thought that was I would have thought that's a rookie mistake 101 to give them anything like that they could use to fight each other with, but
a horrible.
Hey ho. But yeah, those gangways do look very sort of they're not very wide, not very sturdy looking.
It wouldn't take but just a little push.
Exactly. So, what would you say to someone who was going to get the chance to go and investigate Mopen? What would your advice be to them?
I would say you're in for a treat. I mean, if this is something that you're into, I think you're definitely going to get some EVPs. I would definitely carry a digital recorder. Mm-hmm. You know, people always ask me what's my favorite piece of equipment, and I always tell them other than your own senses, you know, because really you're going there to have a personal experience. Mm-hmm. When you're not on a television show or you're not on a team to try and help somebody, you're going to these types of places for your own personal experience. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people your own senses, what you're able to see or hear or feel. But I always say a digital recorder is the best piece of technology to bring, because still to this day, after all the crazy equipment that's been developed and is still being developed, it, in my opinion, is the way to get the most definitive answers. So I would say definitely bring your digital recorders. Stay open, and I would advise some people to maybe not to get so brushed up on the history, because if you're in an area and you get some EVPs and you know it's intelligent and it's trying to tell a story or something, then you can go back and check the history. Yeah. And those are the really surprising times when you're like, oh wow, you know this actually happened here, and I didn't even know this happened, and I've got this evidence here to back it up. So. You know, some people try that, and then some people are like you. They like to get brushed up on the history, so they'll be a little more prepared to know what questions to ask and what area they're going to.
Yeah. But to be honest with you, Chris, doing this show every single week, it's impossible for me not to know the history of places.
Oh, absolutely. I can only imagine. Yeah, you got to know
it. Exactly. So, what have our gorgeous boys, the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, got going on at the moment?
Oh, well, we're just gearing up and getting ready for the next Haunted Live. It's going to be this Friday night. Mm-hmm. You know, it's at a secret location. They're all secret until the time we air. Because if not, we'd have people showing up and trying to mess with us. Okay. But other than that, we got a couple events coming up in the States. Just about every weekend we had to cancel an event this Saturday at in North Carolina, the North Carolina Battleship, because of the hurricanes that hit the Carolinas. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to attend that event, and we're just still keeping the people over there in our prayers. Next weekend, we're going to be at the Thomas House. It's a haunted hotel in Red Bull Springs, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Then we've got the Palace Theater. That's a haunted theater that we have here in where I grew up in Gallatin, Tennessee. We'll be doing an event there. We've got Hills Bar Dam in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. We're going to Rhodes Hall in Atlanta, Georgia in November. We have some events going on in Ohio. We've got some events going on in Savannah, Georgia at Moon River Brewery, December. And then we're going to St. Albans Sanatorium. That's in Radford, Virginia. That'll be the last event of the year on December 15th.
Wow, busy then.
Oh, yeah.
Well, on that note, because I know you've got another a conference call coming in shortly to do with the television show. Make us a promise, Chris, when you know when the television show is going to be aired in the UK. Please do let us know so that we can promote it to all our UK listeners. We do have listeners all over the world, so that we can promote it for you.
Absolutely.
But stay doing what you guys do. Stay Southern gentlemen, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next show and hearing what you guys get up to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Had a lot of fun. Like I said, it's a nice break away from the stresses of making a television show.
And talking to someone with an English accent as well.
Yes, absolutely. I love the accent. I wish I had an English accent.
There's lots of us over here. We've all got it.
I know. And one day we're going to make it over there. We're going to get across the pond one of these days.
Good. Well, on that note, I'm going to let Chris go. But thank you ever so much for listening to tonight's show on Haunted Histories with Chris Smith from the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Don't forget, we have shows on 5 nights of the week. You can catch up on all of them, both on Spreaker and on YouTube. But until next week, it'll just leave me to say, have a good evening, everyone. Sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.